just a heads up, until I get a mic that's worth literally anything, I'm going to be sticking mostly to these short form videos so I don't fry your ears. If you want me to be able to justify getting a new mic sooner, share this video with your friends, consider subscribing, commenting, all that stuff. Anyways, on with the show. A while back, I was taking a picture of my Etrian Odyssey collection to post on Twitter in celebration of the launch of Origins. Hot boy shit, I know. Due to the sheer happenstance of how my collection is stored, I pulled out Etrian Mystery Dungeon, the series' lone spin-off, and a crossover with the storied Mystery Dungeon franchise, and then noticed Persona Q sat right beneath it. This stun-locked me for a second because I thought, oh, I should include this in the picture because it's basically just Etrian Odyssey gameplay with Persona characters. And then looked in my other hand and realized, by that same logic, I shouldn't include EMD because it's just a Mystery Dungeon game with Etrian Odyssey imagery. Ultimately, I decided to include EMD and not Q just because the picture looked better that way. But thinking about this has unfortunately poisoned my brain, and now I'm gonna poison you guys too. Smile emoji. So what series are these games a part of? Actually, let's just focus on Persona Q right now because it'll be easier and you're a lot more likely to have played a Persona game than an Etrian Odyssey game. Your first instinct for this game may be to point out that the title pretty prominently says Persona. Unfortunate for you, Mr. Gamer, I have a degree in Japanese and am cursed with the knowledge that this little Q right here, or I guess it's a pretty big Q, this Q, comes from Etrian Odyssey's Japanese title, Seikaiju no Mei Q, which basically makes this title's title a portmanteau of the two series titles, same as Etrian Mystery Dungeon. Beyond that, I guess the title feels like a bad decision maker, given that the games industry kinda just uses titles as marketing tools or whatever. So where do we go from here? Well, the primary divide here seems to be that both games are considered part of the series to which their narratives are more closely related. Even as a writer-brained person, this kinda feels off to me for a few reasons. Starting with Persona Q, while the game definitely generates appeal on the back of the Persona characters that appear within it, it's definitely not written like Persona, unless you feel like being really charitable to Q, or I guess really mean to P3 and P4. A quick glance at the staff list shows that a lot of people who worked on Q also did work on Persona 3 and 4, so maybe it's just me, but beyond the fact that it's a literal continuation of Persona 3 and 4's canon, doesn't really seem to carry on much of those games' narrative identity. After years of listening to people whine about the characterization of the cast in this game, I suspect I'm not alone. On that note, does Etrian Odyssey have enough narrative identity to say Q is too inconsistent with it and needs to be considered part of a separate series? Contrary to popular belief, Etrian isn't entirely lacking a story, and the story that's told is generally about a group of heroes who explore a labyrinth, which is pretty standard for Atlus games, I guess. So I don't really see what would make this narrative too Persona to be Etrian. Earlier, I mentioned that canon is a link PQ has that ties it directly to the Persona series, and I'm sure many of you have been fuming at how I'm ignoring something so obvious. But if I'm being honest, I think canon's a kinda weak point for most gamer arguments because of how arbitrary it is. Most of the time, canon in game series is defined by what a company thinks will paint the best picture for their upcoming projects marketing-wise. Trying to appeal to fans? Suddenly every game was building to this epic conclusion. Trying to rope new people in? Take the numbers out of the title, and say the game is literally unconnected to past games, regardless of what the actual text of the game has to say about that. Most games in a long-running series don't even share the same writing staff, and weren't written all at the start, so to construct arguments about a body of work, as if it were a singular work, it could be interesting, but it feels pretty flawed to me. Ultimately, this little logic prison about these games is kinda pointless to escape. After all, the culture these games exist in has long since decided where they belong. That being said, I hope this highlight of human taxonomic brain damage might cause you to think a little more critically about the context in which you perceive games, and maybe the way you look at series as a whole. I often catch myself treating a game differently just because another game that I guess is part of the series I perceive it to be a part of exists. We could all stand to benefit if, instead of grabbing the closest thing off our cosmic bookshelves to compare a game to, we really considered the merits of the comparison we make more thoroughly.